The alarm blared as smoke filled the cabin. With both pilots unconscious, Elise Thompson dropped her mop, raced to the cockpit, and gripped the controls. "What are you doing?" the flight attendant screamed. Elise's voice hardened, "Saving 200 lives. I've flown F-35s in 3 wars. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever felt underestimated, and subscribe to hear more stories about extraordinary people rising above discrimination. Now, buckle up as we reveal how a janitor's hidden past changed the fate of everyone on board Flight 237. Dawn broke over Reagan National Airport as Elise Jackson pulled her weathered Honda into the employee parking lot. At 45, her face showed the lines of hardship and dignity in equal measure. She adjusted her plain blue uniform, tucking her grandfather's Air Force pin safely inside her breast pocket. It was 4:30 a.m., and the terminal would soon fill with travelers who would look through her as if she were invisible. 8 years. 8 years of mopping floors, cleaning bathrooms, and wiping down tray tables. 8 years since she touched the controls of an aircraft. 8 years of swallowing her pride as pilots with half her skill swaggered past. "Morning, Elise," called Hector from maintenance, one of the few who bothered to learn her name. "Morning," she replied with a nod, collecting her cleaning cart from the supply closet. The early shift was her preference. Fewer people meant fewer stares, fewer assumptions. She moved through the terminal with practiced efficiency, polishing surfaces already cleaner than most homes. Her section included gates A through D, primarily used by Horizon Airlines, where the prejudice seemed especially thick. By 6:30, the first flight crews arrived. Elise kept her head down as Captain Bradley Wilson and his co-pilot strode past, their crisp uniforms a stark contrast to her faded blue coveralls. "Hey, cleaning lady," Bradley called without looking at her. "Coffee spill by the check-in desk." "Not Elise. Not Ms. Jackson. Just cleaning lady." As if her identity was defined solely by the mop in her hands. She bit back a response and turned toward the spill. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm. Clean, polish, empty trash, restock bathrooms. Always invisible except when something needed cleaning. She worked her way toward the Horizon Airlines offices, where executives would soon arrive for their morning meetings. Right on schedule, CEO Richard Davidson walked through the doors at 7:45, his tailored suit probably costing more than Elise made in 2 months. 8 years she'd cleaned his office, and not once had he acknowledged her presence with more than a dismissive glance. Today was no different. He walked past as she dusted the awards cabinet displaying Horizon's commitment to diversity and inclusion. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Richard, did you see the quarterly numbers?" Thomas Green, operations manager, fell into step beside Davidson. "We're outperforming United on the East Coast routes." "Good, good. Let's discuss in the conference room." Elise continued dusting, becoming part of the furniture as the men talked. "By the way," Thomas lowered his voice, though not enough, "the board was asking about our diversity hiring initiative." Richard scoffed. "Tell them we're working on it. You know my stance. We keep the airline white at the top, diverse at the bottom. Keeps the shareholders and the public relations team happy." They laughed as if sharing a harmless joke, never noticing Elise's knuckles whitening around her dusting cloth. Later that morning, as Elise cleaned the pilot's lounge, Bradley Wilson was holding court with several other pilots. "So this new girl, Harvard education, applies for the pilot training program," he said between bites of donut. "I told HR to put her application at the bottom of the pile. Last thing we need is more diversity hires who can't handle the pressure." Thomas Green entered, pouring himself coffee. "Speaking of wasted education, did you know our janitor went to college?" Bradley raised an eyebrow. "The black one? No way. HR files. She has a degree from somewhere. Probably one of those affirmative action things." Elise kept mopping, her movements mechanical while her mind burned. Not just college. The Air Force Academy. Top of her class. 3 combat tours. Distinguished Flying Cross. But they'd never know because they'd never ask. The only person at Horizon who treated Elise with consistent respect was Zoe Parker, a young black flight attendant who had started 6 months ago. "Good morning, Ms. Jackson," Zoe said, entering the break room Elise was cleaning. "Morning, Zoe. Early flight today. Chicago at 9. How are you doing?" The simple question, genuinely asked, was rare enough to make Elise pause. "I'm fine, thank you." Zoe settled at a table with her coffee, watching as Elise efficiently organized the room. "You know, I've noticed something about you." Elise tensed. "What's that?" "During your breaks, you're always reading aviation magazines or flight manuals. Are you interested in flying?" The question hung in the air. For a moment, Elise considered telling the truth. Instead, she shrugged. "Just interested in how things work. You seem to understand it really well. I overheard you correcting something a pilot said yesterday about approach vectors. I just pick things up. Listen enough, you learn." Zoe smiled. "Well, if you ever want to talk aviation, I'm all ears. My dad was a private pilot." The connection was tempting. Someone who might understand. But Elise had learned the hard way that sharing her past only invited more pain. "I appreciate that," she said simply, gathering her supplies. Later that day, Elise was cleaning the cockpit of a recently arrived plane when Captain Alan Rogers and his co-pilot entered for pre-flight checks. They barely acknowledged her as she wiped down surfaces. "Fuel calculations look off," Rogers muttered, running through his checklist. Elise glanced at the screen, noticing the error immediately. "Sir, the system is using yesterday's headwind data," she said before she could stop herself. Rogers looked up, surprised and annoyed. "Excuse me? The headwind data? It's from yesterday. Today's forecast shows a 15-knot difference." The cockpit fell silent. Rogers stared at her, then checked the system. His face tightened when he confirmed she was right. "Thank you for the housekeeping tips," he said coldly. "But maybe stick to what you know." Elise nodded, collected her supplies, and left the cockpit. Behind her, she heard the co-pilot mutter, "How does a janitor know about headwind data?" How indeed. Elise's apartment was in a modest complex in Alexandria, 15 minutes from the airport. The one-bedroom unit was sparsely furnished but meticulously maintained. To a casual observer, it revealed little about its occupant beyond tidiness and minimalism. But behind the locked door of her bedroom closet lay the remnants of another life. After showering away the day's grime, Elise unlocked the closet and pulled out a military footlocker. She entered the combination on the padlock and lifted the lid. Inside were the carefully preserved artifacts of her previous identity, her Air Force dress uniform with silver wings and rows of medals, including the Distinguished Flying Cross. Framed photographs of her standing proudly beside various fighter aircraft, flight logs documenting thousands of hours in the world's most advanced military jets, and newspaper clippings with headlines like, "Captain Elise Jackson leads first all-female combat mission." She ran her fingers over the wing's pin, identical to the one her grandfather had worn as a Tuskegee airman. "Still fighting the same battles, Grandpa," she whispered. Elise had never planned to be a janitor. Her trajectory had been upward from the start. Growing up in Baltimore with parents who emphasized education, she'd excelled academically and athletically. When she announced her intention to apply to the Air Force Academy, her parents had been concerned but supportive. "It will be harder for you," her father had warned. "You'll have to be twice as good to get half the recognition." He wasn't wrong. At the academy, Elise encountered both overt racism and the more insidious kind that manifested as lowered expectations and constant questioning of her abilities. But she graduated top of her class anyway, her natural aptitude for flying impressing even her most skeptical instructors. Her career progressed rapidly. She qualified on multiple aircraft and earned a reputation for exceptional skill and cool-headed decision-making. By 35, she had flown combat missions in 3 different conflicts, commanded her own squadron, and been shortlisted for test pilot school. Then came the incident that changed everything. During a training exercise, Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Stewart, a pilot with political connections but mediocre skills, had violated safety protocols during a close formation maneuver. His jet's wingtip had struck Elise's aircraft, nearly causing both planes to crash. Elise's extraordinary flying had saved both their lives, bringing her damaged aircraft back safely. But Nathan came from money and connections. His father golfed with generals. When investigation time came, Nathan claimed Elise had been the one to violate protocols. Despite flight recorder data suggesting otherwise, the inquiry board, led by General Philip Maxwell, sided with Nathan. The memory still burned. Sitting in that sterile conference room as General Maxwell read the verdict. Captain Elise Jackson, found guilty of negligence and reckless endangerment during flight exercise Delta 6. Recommendation: dishonorable discharge. Just like that, 16 years of exemplary service erased. Her pension gone. Her reputation destroyed. Her wings clipped. She tried appealing, hiring an attorney who specialized in military justice. But the case had been buried, evidence misplaced, witnesses suddenly unavailable or with revised recollections. The aftermath was brutal. Depression consumed her for months. When she finally emerged from the darkness, she discovered she'd been blacklisted throughout the aviation industry. Commercial airlines, cargo companies, even flight schools would interview her, seem impressed, then suddenly withdraw offers after mysterious phone calls. After depleting her savings and facing eviction, she applied for a janitorial position at Reagan National. It was meant to be temporary, just until she could clear her name. But as months stretched into years, temporary became permanent. The job provided stability, anonymity, and something unexpected: access. Because Elise had a project. Every day, during breaks and after shifts, she gathered information. Flight logs, maintenance records, personnel files left open on screens. Slowly building a case against Nathan Stewart, who she discovered was now flying commercial jets after leaving the military with honors and recommendations. Most painfully, she'd learned Nathan had been hired by Horizon Airlines 6 months ago. The same company where she cleaned toilets and emptied trash. The same hallways, the same break rooms. She'd managed to avoid direct contact so far, taking sick days when she knew he'd be flying out of Reagan. But the airline wasn't that big. Confrontation was inevitable. Tonight, scrolling through the crew schedules on an unattended computer, she confirmed her worst fear. Nathan Stewart was assigned as captain on Flight 237 to Chicago tomorrow morning. A flight she was scheduled to clean. She could call in sick again, but that would raise suspicions. She'd already used too many sick days strategically. And something deeper, more primal, resisted the idea of hiding from him again. No, tomorrow she would face the man who had stolen her life and now strutted around in a uniform she had earned many times over. She would do her job, keep her head down, and continue gathering evidence. Her time would come. Elise carefully repacked her footlocker, locking away her medals, her accomplishments, and her wings. For now, she remained a shadow, watching and waiting. But shadows, she reminded herself as she closed the closet door, sometimes had a way of emerging into the light when least expected. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Elise's mood as she arrived for her shift. She went through her usual routine with mechanical precision, cleaning Gate B7 where Flight 237 to Chicago would board in 3 hours. Her mind raced with contingency plans for avoiding Nathan, but a part of her refused to hide. Would he recognize her? Their interactions during the investigation had been limited, and 8 years had changed her. The military captain with confident posture and crisp uniform had been replaced by a middle-aged woman in janitor's blues, hair now showing streaks of gray, face lined with years of suppressed anger and humiliation. As Elise wiped down the boarding area seats, the flight crew for 237 arrived for their pre-flight briefing. Her heart pounded as she spotted him immediately. Nathan Stewart, silver-streaked hair adding distinguished character to his face, for stripes gleaming on his shoulders. He looked prosperous, confident, unburdened by the lives he'd ruined. Elise kept her head down, turning away as the crew passed. But fate had other plans. "Spill by the water fountain," called a gate agent, pointing directly at Elise. "Can you take care of that?" The water fountain was right beside where the crew had stopped. Elise gripped her mop tightly and approached, keeping her face averted. She'd almost finished when Nathan dropped his coffee cup, splattering liquid across the floor she'd just cleaned. "Sorry about that," he said without sincerity. "Guess you've got more work now." Elise bent to clean it up, hoping he wouldn't look too closely. But as she straightened, their eyes met. Recognition dawned slowly on his face, followed by shock, then something uglier. "Well, I'll be damned," Nathan said, voice carrying through the terminal. "Elise Jackson. From fighter jets to toilet scrubbing. Life comes at you fast, doesn't it?" Conversations around them stopped. Other crew members looked confused. Elise stood frozen, mop in hand, as 8 years of practiced invisibility shattered in an instant. "You know her, Captain?" asked co-pilot Victor Henderson. Nathan's smile was cruel. "Oh, we go way back. Captain Jackson here used to fly fighter jets until she nearly killed us both showing off during training. Isn't that right, Elise?" The lie, so casually spoken, reignited the rage Elise had kept banked for years. "That's not what happened." The Military Review Board disagreed. "But hey, at least you found work that suits your attention to detail. Those bathrooms on our planes? Spotless." Laughter rippled through some of the crew. Elise felt heat rising in her face but maintained her composure. "I need to finish my work." As she turned away, Nathan grabbed her arm. "Let me make something clear," he said quietly. "If you cause any trouble, spread any lies about what happened, I'll make sure you're cleaning bus stations instead of airports. Understand?" Elise pulled her arm free. "I understand exactly who you are." She returned to her cart, aware of eyes following her. Zoe Parker, who had witnessed the exchange, approached Nathan. "That was completely unprofessional, Captain Stewart," Zoe said. "Mind your business, Parker," Nathan snapped. "Crew briefing in 5 minutes." As the crew dispersed, Zoe came to Elise. "Are you okay? What was that about?" "Old history," Elise replied, hands trembling slightly as she arranged supplies on her cart. "He had no right to speak to you that way." "It doesn't matter." "Of course it matters. And what did he mean about you flying fighter jets?" Before Elise could respond, a page came over the intercom. "Flight Attendant Parker, report to Briefing Room B immediately." Zoe squeezed Elise's arm. "This isn't over. We'll talk later." Alone again, Elise tried to collect herself. The confrontation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. But it had also awakened something, determination that had been dormant too long. She watched the preparations for Flight 237 with heightened attention. When the aircraft arrived at the gate, she observed the maintenance crew performing their checks. Something caught her eye. A technician frowning at readings from the electrical system, making notes before being called away to another task. Later, as Elise cleaned the aircraft between flights, she noticed the maintenance log had been signed off, but the electrical issue didn't appear to have been resolved. Nathan and Victor entered the cockpit for their pre-flight checks while she was still cleaning. "Sir," she said, setting aside her cleaning supplies. "I noticed the maintenance crew found an electrical issue earlier." Nathan's face hardened. Eavesdropping now. Just finish your cleaning and leave the aviation to professionals. But the portside electrical bus was showing irregular readings. The log doesn't show it was resolved. Listen, janitor, Nathan sneered. I don't need advice from someone who couldn't keep her wings. This aircraft is fine. I've signed off on it. Victor looked uncomfortable. Maybe we should check with maintenance again. The plane is fine, Nathan insisted. We're already behind schedule. Do you want to be the reason 200 people missed their connections? Elise stood her ground. Safety protocols require, get off my aircraft, Nathan interrupted. Now, or I call security. With no choice, Elise gathered her supplies and left. In the jetway, she ran into Zoe. What's wrong? Zoe asked, noting Elise's expression. Quickly, Elise explained about the electrical issue and Nathan's dismissal of her concerns. I'll talk to the lead flight attendant, Zoe promised. Maybe she can, don't, Elise warned. Nathan will just target you next. He has seniority and connections. So what, we just let him potentially endanger a plane full of people because he's on a power trip. Elise hesitated. Let me handle it my way. She went directly to the maintenance office and reported her concerns to Supervisor Jim Collins. He promised to check, but when he called the cockpit, Nathan assured him everything was within parameters. Jim, not wanting to challenge a captain without concrete evidence, reluctantly accepted Nathan's assessment. Would you let your loved ones board a plane with unresolved maintenance issues? Comment number 1 if you believe pilots should always prioritize safety over schedules, or number 2 if you think Elise should have minded her own business. Like this video if you've ever been ignored when raising legitimate concerns, and subscribe to see how this situation spirals into disaster. What would you do if you were Elise in this impossible situation? Elise faced a critical decision. Flight 237 was scheduled to depart in 40 minutes with a potentially dangerous electrical issue. She could escalate to airport authorities, but without current credentials, would anyone believe a janitor over a captain? And if they did investigate and found nothing immediate, Nathan would ensure she lost her job. She had one option left. Approaching the crew scheduling desk, Elise found Marlene, who owed her a favor for covering an emergency cleanup last month. Marlene, I need to swap shifts. Can you put me on the cleaning crew for Flight 237? The Chicago flight. That's Darren's route. I'll take his terminal duty instead. Please, it's important. Marlene looked confused but agreed. I'll update the system. You're scheduled as cabin cleaning staff for Flight 237. 20 minutes later, Elise boarded the aircraft as part of the cleaning crew. As she worked, she kept her eyes open for any signs of the electrical issue. The cabin lights flickered briefly during boarding, subtle, but to her trained eye, a concerning indicator. When Nathan spotted her, his eyes narrowed, but with passengers boarding, he couldn't make a scene. The plane pushed back from the gate on schedule. As they taxied, Elise noted the unusual hum from the electrical systems. Nathan either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. As Flight 237 took off into cloudy skies, Elise settled into her jump seat, hyper-aware of every sound and vibration from the aircraft. The storm they were heading into might stress already compromised systems. She maintained her janitor persona while her pilot's instincts remained on high alert. The real test would come when they reached the heart of the storm. And judging by the dark clouds ahead, they wouldn't have to wait long. An hour into the flight, Flight 237 encountered the predicted turbulence. The aircraft shuddered as it pushed through the weather front, raindrops pelting the windows with increasing intensity. Most passengers gripped their armrests tightly, a few audibly praying as the plane dropped suddenly before stabilizing. For Elise, however, the turbulence wasn't the primary concern. Her focus remained on the cabin lights, which had flickered 3 times in the past 20 minutes. The air conditioning was cycling irregularly too. Subtle signs of electrical instability that most passengers would attribute to the storm, but which Elise recognized as symptomatic of the issue she'd noticed earlier. From her jump seat, she could see into the cockpit when the door opened for flight attendants. Nathan and Victor appeared tense, Victor repeatedly checking instruments while Nathan maintained an outward calm that didn't reach his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," Nathan's voice came over the intercom, artificially smooth. "We're experiencing some expected turbulence as we navigate through this weather system. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We anticipate conditions improving shortly." But Elise knew better. The conditions weren't improving, the electrical system was deteriorating. Each bump and jolt of turbulence seemed to trigger another fluctuation in the aircraft's power. A memory surfaced, Lieutenant Elise Jackson in the cockpit of an F-35, electrical systems failing after taking fire during a mission over hostile territory. She'd managed to isolate the problem, reroute critical systems, and bring the damaged fighter back safely. Her commander had called it textbook crisis management under fire. That incident had earned her one of her commendations. Commendations now locked away in a footlocker while she wore a janitor's uniform on a commercial flight heading for trouble. A particularly violent jolt shook the aircraft. Overhead bins popped open, sending bags tumbling into the aisle. The cabin lights went out completely for 3 seconds before returning at half brightness. The passenger reading lights and entertainment systems remained dark. "This is your first officer," Victor's voice now, less composed than Nathan's. "Please ensure all loose items are secured. Cabin crew, prepare for continued turbulence." Zoe moved efficiently through the cabin, assisting passengers and securing items. When she passed Elise, their eyes met briefly. Zoe's questioning look said everything. "Something's wrong beyond normal turbulence, isn't it?" Elise gave a subtle nod. Zoe continued her duties, but now with an extra alertness. Another violent shake, and this time the lights didn't just flicker. They pulsed in a pattern that made Elise's heart race. That wasn't turbulence affecting the electrics, that was a cascading system failure beginning. A strange odor permeated the cabin, the acrid smell of electrical components overheating. Several passengers noticed, looking around anxiously. "Do you smell that?" an elderly woman asked Elise. "Like something burning?" Before Elise could respond, a high-pitched alarm sounded from the cockpit. The aircraft banked sharply left, causing unsecured items to slide across the cabin. Through the cockpit door, Elise glimpsed Victor's panicked face as he rapidly flipped switches. The smell of smoke grew stronger. A thin haze began to fill the cockpit. "Electrical fire," Elise whispered to herself, unbuckling her seatbelt. This was exactly what she'd feared, the unresolved issue had escalated. Zoe appeared beside her. "What's happening?" "The electrical system is failing. There's likely a fire in the equipment bay beneath the cockpit." "How do you know that?" "Experience. I need to." Elise's explanation was cut short by a sudden loss of cabin pressure. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments. Passengers gasped and screamed, some fumbling with the masks, others frozen in panic. The aircraft pitched downward sharply, then stabilized at a lower altitude. Emergency lights illuminated the aisles as the main lighting system failed completely. "This is your captain," Nathan's voice sounded strained. "We've experienced an electrical malfunction and have descended to 10,000 feet where supplemental oxygen isn't required. Please remain calm and follow crew instructions." Through the cockpit door, now ajar as flight attendants rushed to check on the pilots, Elise could see the smoke thickening. Victor was coughing violently, his oxygen mask apparently malfunctioning. Nathan was struggling with the controls, his movements becoming increasingly erratic as the smoke affected his breathing too. This was the moment when Lieutenant Colonel Elise Jackson's training superseded Elise the janitor's practiced invisibility. She stood up, moving purposefully toward the cockpit despite the turbulence. "Ma'am, you need to stay seated," called Raymond Taylor, the lead flight attendant, trying to intercept her. The pilots are in trouble, Elise replied, continuing forward. We're handling it. Return to your seat immediately. Through the cockpit door, Elise saw Victor slump in his seat, overcome by smoke inhalation. Nathan was still conscious but clearly struggling, his movements becoming uncoordinated as oxygen deprivation affected his brain function. The plane lurched again, dropping altitude rapidly before Nathan managed to stabilize it. But his recovery maneuver was dangerously aggressive, nearly stalling the aircraft. Zoe appeared beside Elise. Raymond, we need help. Both pilots are affected by the smoke. Protocol is clear, Raymond insisted. Passengers stay in their seats. Elise watched through the doorway as Nathan fumbled with his oxygen mask, dropping it, then made a critical error. Instead of reducing throttle during the descent, he increased it, sending the aircraft into an unstable climb. He's making it worse, Elise said, pushing past Raymond. The plane will stall if he continues that climb rate with this damage. How would you know? Raymond began, but stopped as Nathan suddenly collapsed over the controls, sending the aircraft into a steep bank. Warning alarms blared throughout the cabin. Passengers screamed as the plane rolled into an increasingly dangerous attitude. Without intervention, they would enter an unrecoverable spiral. Zoe grabbed Elise's arm. You said you flew fighter jets. Can you fly this? The question hung for only a second before Elise nodded. Yes. Then do something before we all die. Raymond still blocked the cockpit door. This is crazy. She's a janitor. She's our only chance, Zoe countered, then turned to Elise. Save us. With Raymond still hesitating, the aircraft entered a steeper bank. In the cabin, oxygen masks swung wildly as passengers held on for their lives. The decision point had arrived. Elise straightened to her full height, her voice taking on the unmistakable command presence of a military officer. Move aside now, or be responsible for 200 deaths. Raymond, faced with alarms blaring and a plane out of control, finally stepped aside. Elise rushed into the smoke-filled cockpit. Nathan was unconscious, slumped over the controls. Victor lay motionless in the co-pilot's seat. She pulled Nathan back from the yoke, took a deep breath, and grasped the controls of a commercial airliner for the first time in her life. The smoke in the cockpit stung Elise's eyes as she took control of the aircraft, quickly assessing the situation. The 737 was in a 20-degree bank, losing altitude rapidly, multiple system warnings blaring. Her hands moved with practiced precision, muscle memory from thousands of flight hours kicking in despite the different aircraft type. Get them out of here, she ordered Zoe and Raymond, who stood frozen in the doorway. And find the emergency oxygen bottles for the cockpit. They snapped into action, dragging the unconscious pilots into the cabin while Elise stabilized the aircraft, leveling the wings and arresting the descent. The electrical fire had compromised several critical systems, but the primary flight controls still responded. Raymond returned with an emergency oxygen bottle and mask, which Elise quickly donned. With clearer breathing, she fully took in the instrument panel, noting which systems remained operational and which had failed. Who are you really? Raymond asked, watching her hands move confidently across the unfamiliar controls. Lieutenant Colonel Elise Jackson, United States Air Force, retired. She didn't look up as she worked to reroute electrical power to essential systems. I need you to contact air traffic control. Tell them we have a mayday situation, both pilots incapacitated, electrical fire, and request emergency landing clearance at the nearest suitable airport. Raymond hesitated only briefly before picking up the radio handset. Chicago Center, this is Horizon Airlines Flight 237 declaring Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. As Raymond relayed the situation, Elise continued fighting to keep the damaged aircraft stable. The smoke was gradually clearing thanks to the emergency ventilation system she'd activated, but the electrical situation remained precarious. Chicago Center responding, came the controller's voice. Horizon 237, understand you have an electrical fire and incapacitated flight crew. Who is at the controls of the aircraft? Raymond looked at Elise, who nodded for him to pass her the headset. Chicago Center, this is Lieutenant Colonel Elise Jackson, USAF, currently assuming emergency command of Horizon 237. A pause. Horizon 237, please confirm your status. Did you say military personnel is flying the aircraft? Affirmative. I'm a former F-35 pilot with over 3,000 flight hours. Currently employed as cabin staff but taking emergency control due to pilot incapacitation. Aircraft has significant electrical failure and possible fire in the equipment bay. Requesting vectors to nearest airport capable of emergency services for a Boeing 737-800. Another pause, longer this time. Elise could imagine the confusion in the control center. Finally, understood, Horizon 237. Stand by for routing to O'Hare International. Can you confirm your current aircraft status? Elise rattled off altitude, heading, fuel state, and system status with military precision. Be advised we have significant electrical degradation. Navigational systems compromised. Request constant radar guidance. Copy all, Horizon 237. Vectors to O'Hare follow. Turn right heading 040. As Elise followed the controller's instructions, executing a careful turn despite the compromised systems, word of the situation spread through the cabin. Raymond had briefed the other flight attendants, who were managing passenger concerns while preparing for potential emergency landing. In the cabin, passengers whispered and pointed toward the cockpit. The janitor is flying the plane. The question rippled through the rows, equal parts fear and disbelief. Zoe approached a particularly vocal group. Ma'am is a highly experienced military pilot. We're in good hands. But she cleans bathrooms, protested a businessman in first class. And apparently flies fighter jets, Zoe replied firmly. Now please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened. Back in the cockpit, Controller Kevin Bailey had taken over communications. His skepticism was evident in his tone. Horizon 237, this is Specialist Bailey. I need to verify your qualification to handle this aircraft. Elise, busy managing the deteriorating electrical systems, felt a flash of frustration. Bailey, I'm currently keeping 200 people alive in a compromised aircraft. Verify all you want after we're safely on the ground. Standard protocol requires, Sierra Hotel Echo Lima Delta, Elise interrupted, using a military authentication code. Check my credentials later. Right now, I need approach vectors and emergency services standing by. The military terminology shifted Bailey's tone immediately. Copy that, Horizon 237. Continue present heading. Emergency services are being deployed at O'Hare. Can you provide more detail on aircraft condition? As Elise relayed technical information in precise aviation terminology, any remaining doubt about her qualifications evaporated. Her knowledge of aircraft systems, emergency procedures, and communication protocols was unmistakably that of a highly trained professional pilot. News of the situation spread beyond the aircraft. Air traffic control had notified Horizon Airlines headquarters, emergency response teams, and, inevitably, the media. Within minutes, aviation journalists were reporting breaking news: Horizon Airlines flight in distress, reportedly being flown by non-pilot crew member. Inside the cabin, Zoe had organized the other flight attendants to prepare for emergency landing. Nathan and Victor had regained consciousness but remained disoriented and were being given supplemental oxygen by the cabin crew. When Nathan learned what was happening, he attempted to return to the cockpit but was too weak to stand. She can't fly this plane, he protested feebly. She'll kill us all. She's saving us after you ignored her warnings, Zoe responded coldly. Rest and let her work. Word of Elise's true identity continued spreading among passengers. Some recorded videos on their phones, narrating the incredible situation. The janitor who cleans our plane is actually a fighter pilot, and she's now flying us to safety after both pilots passed out from smoke. Raymond returned to the cockpit with water for Elise, watching in amazement as she handled the aircraft with calm expertise. You really were a fighter pilot? F-35 Squadron Commander, Elise confirmed, eyes still on the instruments. 3 combat tours. Then how did you end up? Long story. One I'll tell if we survive this landing. The situation in the cockpit remained dire. The electrical system continued to degrade, with more instruments failing. The landing gear indicator showed uncertainty whether the gear was fully deployed, and the flaps were only partially responsive. Horizon 237, O'Hare Tower, came a new voice on the radio. We have you on approach. Emergency vehicles in position. Be advised we show your transponder code intermittently. Copy that, O'Hare. Electrical systems unstable. Request constant position confirmation. Elise's military training had prepared her for crisis management, but this particular crisis tested every skill she possessed. The Boeing 737 handled completely differently from the fighter jets she'd flown, and its systems were laid out differently. Yet the fundamentals remained the same. Aviate, navigate, communicate. Keep the aircraft flying first, worry about everything else second. As they approached O'Hare, Elise performed calculations in her head, adjusting for the compromised systems and uncertain control responses. Behind her, Raymond watched in awe as she flawlessly executed emergency procedures she hadn't performed in years, on an aircraft type she'd never officially piloted. The revelation of Elise's true identity and skills had transformed the atmosphere aboard Flight 237. The initial panic had given way to a tense hope as passengers realized their fate rested in the hands of someone far more qualified than they'd initially feared. Outside the aircraft, news helicopters captured footage of the damaged 737 approaching O'Hare with smoke still visible from its underside. The headline ticker on news networks read, "Breaking. Janitor revealed as former fighter pilot takes control of troubled flight." As Elise lined up for final approach, she knew the most dangerous part still lay ahead. Landing a damaged aircraft with unreliable systems would test the limits of her abilities. But for the first time in 8 years, she was back where she belonged, at the controls, facing impossible odds, with lives depending on her skill. Lieutenant Colonel Elise Jackson had returned. Horizon 237, this is O'Hare Tower. Runway 28 are cleared for emergency landing. Wind 270 at 12 knots. Emergency vehicles in position. Elise acknowledged the clearance while mentally running through her landing plan. The aircraft's electrical issues had worsened, with more systems failing by the minute. The landing gear indicator still showed uncertain status, flaps were only partially extended, and the smoke, though diminished, continued to seep into the cockpit from the electrical bay below. Cabin crew, prepare for emergency landing, she announced over the intercom. Her voice, calm and authoritative, helped steady the terrified passengers. On approach to O'Hare, the sprawling airport came into view through breaks in the clouds. Fire trucks and ambulances lined the runway, their lights flashing red and white against the gray day. News helicopters hovered at a distance, broadcasting the unfolding drama live across the nation. The aircraft shuddered as Elise configured it for landing, the damaged systems responding sluggishly to her commands. Every adjustment required anticipation and finesse, like handling a wounded animal that might lash out unpredictably. O'Hare Tower, Horizon 237. Be advised we have uncertain gear indication and limited flap extension. Request foam on runway as precaution. Copy Horizon 237. Foam trucks deploying now. We have visual on your aircraft. Gear appears to be down from our position. That was some relief, but Elise couldn't count on it. She'd have to prepare for every contingency, gear collapse, brake failure, control loss on touchdown. Raymond remained in the cockpit, relaying information between Elise and the cabin crew. Everyone secured. Zoe has briefed all passengers on brace position. Good. How are our pilots? Captain Stewart is conscious but still disoriented. First Officer Henderson is more lucid. Both are secured in passenger seats. Elise nodded, her focus returning to the approach. The aircraft was 5 miles out, descending through 3,000 feet. Everything appeared stable until a sudden electrical surge caused multiple systems to flicker simultaneously. "We're losing more electrics," Elise announced, quickly prioritizing essential systems. Primary flight controls still responding but degrading. The cabin lights failed completely, leaving only emergency lighting. In the passenger compartment, frightened voices rose in volume. Zoe's steady instructions could be heard, keeping people calm. At that moment, the cockpit door opened, and Nathan Stewart stumbled in, supported by Victor Henderson. Both men wore portable oxygen masks but looked pale and unsteady. "I'm taking back control," Nathan demanded weakly, his voice muffled by the mask. Elise didn't take her eyes off the instruments. "Return to your seat and secure yourself. I'm in the middle of an emergency approach." "This is my aircraft," Nathan insisted, reaching for the co-pilot's seat. Victor held him back. "Stewart, she's handling it. Look outside, we're lined up perfectly. She can't fly this plane. She was discharged for incompetence." "That's not true, and you know it," Elise replied, still focused on the approach. "You lied during the investigation. You nearly killed us both, then blamed me. You have no right." "Right now I have the only right that matters," Elise cut him off. "The right to save these passengers after you ignored warnings and passed out at the controls. Now sit down or I'll have you restrained." The authority in her voice, coupled with his still weakened state, finally silenced Nathan. Victor guided him to the observer seat, where he strapped in, glaring at Elise. The runway threshold was approaching rapidly. At 2 miles out, another system failed. The ground proximity warning system. Tower, Horizon 237. GPWS inoperative. Request altitude callouts on approach. Copy Horizon 237. You're on glide path. Altitude 1,000 feet, 900. Elise focused entirely on the landing now, blocking out everything except the aircraft's movement and the tower's voice. Her hands made tiny, precise adjustments to maintain the optimal approach angle despite the compromised systems. Have you ever had to take control in a crisis when everyone doubted you? Comment number 1 if you believe in trusting experienced professionals regardless of their current job title, or number 2 if you think Nathan was right to question Elise's authority. Hit like if you're on the edge of your seat waiting to see if this damaged plane makes it safely to the ground. Will Elise's fighter pilot skills transfer to landing a commercial airliner with failing systems and 200 lives hanging in the balance? 500 feet, 400, on glide path, the controller continued. The runway grew larger in the windscreen. Elise could see the foam laid down by emergency vehicles, a white strip along the center of the concrete. Wind gusts buffeted the aircraft, requiring constant corrections. 300, 200, 100 feet. Brace, brace, brace. Elise called over the intercom. The 737 crossed the threshold at precisely the right speed and angle, despite the compromised systems. Elise began the flare maneuver, gradually raising the nose to slow the descent rate. As the main landing gear touched down, a loud bang echoed through the aircraft, not the expected touchdown sound, but something more mechanical and concerning. Warning lights flashed across the panel as the left main gear strut partially collapsed. "Left gear compromised," Elise announced calmly, immediately compensating with rudder and differential braking to keep the aircraft centerline. The 737 settled onto the runway with the left wing dipping dangerously low. Sparks flew as metal scraped concrete. In the cabin, passengers screamed as the aircraft shuddered violently. Elise fought the controls, keeping the damaged aircraft tracking straight despite the asymmetrical drag. She reduced power on the right engine while maintaining enough thrust on the left to counterbalance the drag from the damaged gear. "Right gear and nose gear holding," she reported. Continuing controlled deceleration. The aircraft slowed, trailing sparks and smoke but remaining on the runway. Emergency vehicles paced alongside, foam cannons directed at the sparking left wing. As their speed dropped below 80 knots, the left wing dipped further. For a terrifying moment, it appeared the aircraft might ground loop, spin uncontrollably across the runway. Elise countered with perfect timing, using remaining hydraulic pressure to adjust control surfaces and maintain directional control. Finally, the aircraft came to a complete stop, listing to the left but upright and intact. Immediately, emergency slides deployed from all exits as flight attendants initiated evacuation procedures. "Aircraft secured," Elise announced to the tower. Commencing emergency evacuation. In the cabin, Zoe and the other flight attendants directed passengers to the nearest exits. "Leave everything. Jump and move away from the aircraft." As evacuation proceeded, Elise performed the emergency shutdown procedure, ensuring fuel and electrical systems were isolated to prevent fire. Only then did she unbuckle and prepare to leave the cockpit. Nathan stood blocking her path. "This isn't over, Jackson. Move aside. I need to assist with evacuation." "You think you're some kind of hero?" "When the investigation happens," Victor pulled Nathan away. "For God's sake, Stuart, she just saved everyone on board. Let it go." Outside, passengers slid to safety and ran toward the emergency vehicles. Camera crews captured the entire scene as fire suppression teams sprayed foam on the aircraft's damaged left side. The evacuation proceeded smoothly, with Zoe and Raymond ensuring no one was left behind. Elise was among the last to exit, helping an elderly passenger down the slide before jumping herself. As her feet hit the tarmac, the reality of what had just happened finally hit her. After 8 years of invisibility, she had just performed an emergency landing of a damaged commercial aircraft with 200 souls on board. And she had done it in front of news cameras that were broadcasting worldwide. Her anonymity was gone. Her carefully constructed life as just a janitor had ended the moment she took those controls. Whatever came next, investigation, media scrutiny, confronting Nathan's lies, would happen in the harsh light of public attention. As paramedics checked her for injuries, Elise watched passengers reuniting with loved ones who had rushed to the airport upon hearing the news. Tears, embraces, prayers of gratitude. 200 people who might not have survived without her intervention. For the first time in 8 years, Lieutenant Colonel Elise Jackson allowed herself to feel something like pride. Whatever the consequences, she had done what she was born to do, fly, and save lives in the process. The emergency teams, having confirmed everyone was safely evacuated, gave Elise a thumbs up. She nodded in acknowledgement, then turned to face the airport terminal where airline officials, investigators, and media were gathering. The next battle was about to begin. The O'Hare Emergency Response Center buzzed with activity as medical personnel assessed passengers and crew from Flight 237. Elise sat on an examination table, refusing treatment until everyone else had been checked. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her hands with a slight tremor and her mind racing with implications of what had just happened. Through the large windows, she could see the damaged aircraft on the runway, surrounded by emergency vehicles and investigation teams. The left wing scraped nearly to the engine, the landing gear collapsed, evidence of how close they'd come to disaster. "Ms. Jackson." A paramedic approached. "We need to check you for smoke inhalation." "I'm fine." "How are the pilots?" "Captain Stewart and First Officer Henderson are being transported to Northwestern Memorial for observation. Oxygen deprivation, smoke inhalation." Elise nodded, finally allowing the paramedic to place an oxygen mask over her face. As she breathed the cool, clean oxygen, a commotion at the entrance caught her attention. A swarm of reporters had gathered outside the glass doors, cameras pointed toward the treatment area. Airport security was barely containing them. Through the chaos, Elise spotted men in Horizon Airlines corporate attire being escorted in, their faces grim. Zoe appeared at her side, still in her flight attendant uniform, though it was now rumpled and smelled of smoke. "How are you holding up?" "I've had better days," Elise replied, removing the oxygen mask briefly. "How are the passengers?" "Minor injuries only. Mostly shock and anxiety. Thanks to you." Zoe's eyes were serious. "You saved everyone on that plane today." Before Elise could respond, the doors opened, and Richard Davidson, CEO of Horizon Airlines, strode in with Thomas Green and several other executives. They headed straight for the airport administrator, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. "They're already in damage control mode," Zoe observed. "Of course they are," Elise replied, watching them. A janitor just exposed that one of their pilots ignored maintenance concerns, then passed out during a flight emergency. As if hearing her, Davidson looked over, his eyes narrowing as he recognized Elise. He excused himself from his conversation and approached, flanked by a woman Elise recognized as the airline's chief legal counsel. Ms. Jackson, Davidson began, his voice professionally concerned. "On behalf of Horizon Airlines, I want to thank you for your assistance during today's unfortunate incident." "Unfortunate incident?" Elise repeated. "A catastrophic electrical failure nearly brought down one of your aircraft after maintenance concerns were ignored by your captain." Davidson's smile tightened. "We're still gathering facts about what occurred. Our primary concern right now is the well-being of our passengers and crew. Including you." The lawyer stepped forward. "Ms. Jackson, we'd like to arrange private transportation for you to a hotel where you can rest comfortably while we sort this out." Elise recognized the tactic immediately. Get her away from media, passengers, and witnesses. Isolated where they could control the narrative. "I appreciate the offer, but I'll make my own arrangements." Davidson's professional facade slipped slightly. "I must insist. As a Horizon employee, as the person who just saved 200 lives on your aircraft, I'll do as I see fit," Elise countered. "And I believe there are investigators who will want to speak with me." As if on cue, two FAA officials entered the room, scanning the crowd before spotting Elise. Davidson intercepted them, introducing himself and attempting to steer them toward a private conference room. The officials, however, made it clear they needed to speak with Elise directly. Meanwhile, outside the treatment center, the media frenzy was growing. Local news had broken the story initially, airport janitor revealed as ex-fighter pilot lands damaged plane. But as more details emerged, national networks picked it up. Passengers were already giving interviews, their smartphone videos of the emergency providing compelling footage. "The janitor who cleans our planes turned out to be some kind of military pilot. She just walked into the cockpit and took control like she was born for it. I heard the regular pilot tried to stop her, but she said she'd flown F-35s in combat." The story was irresistible, a black woman working as a janitor, secretly a decorated fighter pilot, stepping up in a crisis to save hundreds of lives. Social media exploded with the hashtag #JanitorHero as the video spread. Zoe's phone buzzed constantly with notifications. "It's going viral," she told Elise. "Everyone wants to know your story." Elise watched the chaos unfolding with a mixture of dread and resignation. Her carefully constructed anonymity was shattered beyond repair. As the day progressed, Elise gave her statement to FAA investigators, providing precise technical details about the electrical failure and her actions to land the aircraft safely. When questioned about her qualifications, she gave them her military service record and explained her current employment situation, though not the full circumstances of her discharge. "We'll need to verify this information," said the lead investigator, clearly impressed despite his professional neutrality. "Of course." By evening, Elise had been moved to a private room in the airport administration area, away from the media but still independent of Horizon's control. Zoe had appointed herself Elise's unofficial assistant, bringing food and updates on the situation. Davidson gave a press conference, Zoe reported, showing Elise a video on her phone. "Listen to this nonsense." On screen, Richard Davidson stood before a Horizon Airlines banner, his expression appropriately grave yet optimistic. Today's events, while concerning, highlight Horizon's commitment to having exceptional people at every level of our organization. We always saw potential in Elise Jackson and are proud of her heroic actions. "That's rich," Elise muttered. 8 years of cleaning lady and suddenly I'm their success story. "It gets better." He implied they knew about your background all along, part of some diversity initiative to help veterans transition to civilian aviation. Elise laughed bitterly. "Yesterday, I was invisible. Today, I'm their diversity poster child." While Horizon attempted to control the narrative, passengers from Flight 237 were telling a different story. Videos circulated of Nathan's confrontation with Elise before the flight, his dismissal of her maintenance concerns, and his attempt to reclaim control during the emergency. The contrast between his arrogance and her competence painted a damning picture. As night fell, Elise finally checked her phone, which had been silenced during the chaos. Hundreds of notifications filled the screen, messages from former military colleagues who had recognized her in the news, journalists requesting interviews, and even several aviation companies with job offers. One message stood out, from Amelia Washington, investigative reporter for the Washington Post. "Ms. Jackson, there's clearly more to your story than today's heroism. I've been investigating discrimination in military aviation for years. If you're willing to share your full experience, I can help ensure the truth comes out. No spin, just facts." Elise stared at the message for a long time. For 8 years, she'd kept her story private, gathering evidence quietly while planning for eventual vindication. Now circumstances had forced her hand. Perhaps it was time to embrace the spotlight rather than hide from it. She was composing a reply when Zoe burst into the room. "Elise, you need to see this." The hashtag Justice for Elise hashtag is trending nationally. Flight attendants from Horizon had begun sharing their experiences witnessing discrimination at the airline. Passengers were posting testimonials about Elise's calm professionalism during the crisis. Military veterans were speaking out about similar experiences of discrimination and unfair treatment. "People are rallying around you," Zoe said excitedly. "This could be the moment to tell your full story." Elise took a deep breath. The path forward was becoming clear. She finished her message to Amelia Washington, "I'm ready to talk. Not just about today, but about everything that led to it. I have documents proving what really happened 8 years ago." As she pressed send, a notification appeared, a meeting request from Horizon Airlines for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Subject, Employment Status Review. Elise smiled grimly. They were planning to suspend her, perhaps even terminate her employment despite her heroism. Standard procedure for damage control. What they didn't know was that Elise Jackson was done hiding. For 8 years, she had been invisible, swallowing her pride while planning her redemption. Now redemption had found her in the most unexpected way. Tomorrow's meeting wouldn't go as Horizon planned. Because Lieutenant Colonel Elise Jackson was finally ready to fight back. The conference room on the executive floor of Horizon Airlines' Chicago office was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the O'Hare runways, a power backdrop for the massive mahogany table where Richard Davidson sat at the head, flanked by Thomas Green, Chief Legal Counsel Patricia Winters, and 2 other executives Elise didn't recognize. Elise entered precisely at 9 a.m., dressed not in her janitor's uniform but in a crisp navy pantsuit she'd purchased that morning. She carried a leather portfolio containing documents she'd safeguarded for 8 years. "Ms. Jackson, thank you for joining us," Davidson began, gesturing to a chair at the far end of the table. "I trust you've recovered from yesterday's ordeal." "Completely, thank you," Elise replied, taking the seat but not the implied subordinate position. She placed her portfolio on the table, maintaining eye contact with Davidson. Patricia Winters spoke next, her tone professionally sympathetic. Ms. Jackson, first let me reiterate our gratitude for your actions yesterday. The situation was extraordinary, and your intervention likely saved many lives. However, Thomas Green added, there are protocols and procedures that must be followed, even in emergencies. Taking control of an aircraft without authorization is a serious matter. Elise remained silent, observing the choreography of their approach. Good cop, bad cop, with legal constraints thrown in to justify whatever they had planned. Davidson leaned forward. We find ourselves in a delicate situation. While we appreciate your assistance during the emergency, your actions have created significant liability concerns for Horizon Airlines. What Richard means, Patricia interjected smoothly, is that we need to handle this situation carefully for everyone's benefit. We've prepared a generous settlement package. She slid a document across the table. Elise glanced at it without touching it. The terms were visible, a lump sum payment of $250,000 in exchange for voluntary termination, confidentiality agreement, and waiver of all claims against Horizon Airlines. We believe this represents fair compensation for both your years of service and your actions yesterday, Davidson said. It would allow you to transition to whatever new opportunities might arise from your sudden, public recognition. Elise finally spoke. And if I don't accept? Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Then we would need to proceed with a formal review of your unauthorized assumption of flight duties, potentially leading to termination for cause. I see. Elise opened her portfolio and removed a document. Before I respond to your offer, I'd like to address some factual matters about Flight 237 and Captain Nathan Stewart. Davidson's expression hardened. Captain Stewart isn't the subject of this meeting. Actually, he is central to it. Elise placed a document on the table. This is a copy of the maintenance log from yesterday morning, showing an unresolved electrical issue that Captain Stewart dismissed and overrode. Thomas Green scoffed. Ms. Jackson, with all due respect, you're a janitor, not a maintenance technician or pilot. Which brings me to my second point. Elise removed another document. My full military service record, including 16 years as an Air Force pilot, my graduation from the Air Force Academy, 3 combat tours, and my final rank of lieutenant colonel. The room fell silent as the executives exchanged glances. We're aware of your military background, Davidson said carefully. Though perhaps not its full extent. Then you're also aware that I was uniquely qualified to identify the maintenance issue Captain Stewart ignored, and to take control when he became incapacitated. Elise maintained her calm, professional demeanor. But what you may not know is why a decorated fighter pilot with my qualifications has been working as a janitor for the past 8 years. Before anyone could respond, the conference room door opened. Bradley Wilson, Horizon's chief pilot, entered with Nathan Stewart. Nathan's face darkened when he saw Elise. Sorry we're late, Bradley said, taking a seat beside Davidson. Nathan was just released from the hospital this morning. Nathan glared at Elise. What is she doing here? This should be a disciplinary hearing, not a negotiation. Elise met his gaze steadily. I was just about to explain our history, Nathan. Or should I call you Lieutenant Colonel Stewart? Nathan's face paled slightly. Davidson looked between them, confused. You two know each other beyond Horizon? Oh yes, Elise confirmed. Nathan and I served together. In fact, he's the reason I received a dishonorable discharge despite an exemplary service record. She removed another document from her portfolio. This is the official report from the training exercise incident that ended my military career. It states that I violated safety protocols, endangering both aircraft. What it doesn't show is that the flight recorder data was altered and key witness testimonies were suppressed. This is absurd, Nathan sputtered. The military conducted a thorough investigation. Led by your father's golf buddy, General Maxwell, Elise countered. The same General Maxwell who is currently under investigation for multiple instances of evidence tampering in cases involving female and minority officers. The executives looked increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia Winters leaned forward. Ms. Jackson, these allegations are serious but potentially irrelevant to our current situation. They're entirely relevant, Elise insisted. Because after blacklisting me from commercial aviation, Nathan falsified his own credentials to secure his position at Horizon. She produced another document. Nathan's official separation from the Air Force claims he left voluntarily as a decorated officer. In reality, he was facing a review for multiple safety violations but was allowed to resign quietly due to his connections. Bradley Wilson looked sharply at Nathan. Is this true? She's making this up, Nathan insisted, but his confidence was wavering. She's bitter about washing out and wants to blame me. I have supporting evidence for everything I've claimed, Elise continued calmly. Including sworn statements from other pilots who witnessed the incident but were pressured to remain silent. The tension in the room was palpable when another interruption came, this time a knock followed by an airport security officer. Excuse me, the officer said. There are FAA investigators and representatives from the National Transportation Safety Board who need to join this meeting immediately. Davidson looked alarmed but nodded. The door opened wider, admitting two FAA officials Elise recognized from yesterday and a stern-looking woman in an NTSB jacket. Mr. Davidson, the NTSB representative began without preamble, I'm Director Helen Marshall. We're expanding our investigation beyond the Flight 237 incident to include potential patterns of safety violations and discrimination at Horizon Airlines. This is highly irregular, Patricia Winters objected. We've had no notice of an expanded investigation. You're receiving notice now, Marshall replied coolly. Our preliminary findings from the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder confirm Ms. Jackson's account of both the emergency and the pre-flight maintenance concerns she raised. Nathan's face had lost all color. The FAA senior investigator turned to him. Captain Stewart, we'll need to review your complete service record and certification documentation as part of this investigation. The boardroom door opened once more, and a distinguished older woman in a naval uniform entered, accompanied by two military officers. Senator Monroe, Davidson said, rising in surprise. We weren't expecting, clearly, Senator Vanessa Monroe replied. Her eyes found Elise, and a smile of recognition crossed her face. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson. It's been too long. Senator, Elise acknowledged with respect. Or should I say Captain Monroe? Senator works fine these days, Vanessa replied, then addressed the stunned executives. For those unaware, Colonel Jackson and I flew together in the 33rd Fighter Squadron. I've been following her story with great interest since yesterday's events. Davidson attempted to regain control of the situation. Senator, we're in the middle of a sensitive personnel matter, which has now become a matter of national interest, Senator Monroe interrupted. The Senate Armed Services Committee has opened an inquiry into the circumstances surrounding Colonel Jackson's discharge, including evidence of systemic discrimination and retaliation against female and minority service members. She turned to Nathan. Colonel Stewart, General Maxwell has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Several of your former squadron mates have already provided sworn statements contradicting your version of events. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Nathan looked like he might be sick. Bradley Wilson had moved subtly away from him, creating physical distance that mirrored the growing professional separation. Elise remained composed, watching as the power dynamics shifted dramatically. After 8 years of being powerless, justice was unfolding before her eyes. Richard Davidson, ever the corporate survivor, recognized the changing winds. Senator, Director Marshall, we at Horizon Airlines are committed to full cooperation with any investigation. If there have been improprieties, we want them addressed. Starting with Nathan Stewart's credentials, Bradley Wilson added quickly, throwing his former ally under the bus. If he falsified qualifications, that's grounds for immediate termination. Nathan stood abruptly. This is a witch hunt. You can't possibly believe. Captain Stewart, the FAA investigator cut in, please remain seated. We have specific questions regarding your handling of the maintenance warning prior to Flight 237's departure. As Nathan sank back into his chair, Elise finally allowed herself a small smile. She looked at Davidson, who was watching her with new calculation in his eyes. I believe your settlement offer is still on the table, she said calmly. I'd like to propose a counteroffer. Patricia Winters looked wary. We're listening. I don't want money, Elise stated clearly. I want reinstatement, not as a janitor, but as a pilot. Full seniority based on my years of military service. Back pay for the difference between janitorial and pilot salary for 8 years. And a leadership position in pilot training and safety. Davidson started to object, but Senator Monroe interjected. That sounds entirely reasonable given the circumstances. In fact, I'd suggest it's the minimum appropriate remedy. Thomas Green leaned toward Davidson, whispering urgently. Davidson nodded slightly, then addressed Elise with a completely transformed demeanor. Ms. Jackson, or rather, Captain Jackson, in light of your exceptional qualifications and yesterday's demonstration of your abilities, Horizon Airlines would be honored to have you join our pilot corps. His tone was now almost obsequious. We can discuss specific positions and compensation details once these investigations are concluded. Elise nodded, maintaining her professional composure despite the triumph surging through her. I appreciate that, Mr. Davidson. And I have one additional request. Yes. A formal review of Horizon's hiring and promotion practices, with particular attention to qualified minority candidates who may have been overlooked. Elise's voice was firm. I don't want to be your token success story while the system remains unchanged. Davidson hesitated, but with Senator Monroe, FAA, and NTSB officials watching expectantly, he had little choice. Of course. Horizon is committed to diversity and inclusion at all levels. Excellent, Elise said, rising from her seat with the dignity of the officer she had always been. Then I believe we understand each other. As the meeting adjourned, various officials approached Elise to arrange follow-up interviews and statements. Nathan was escorted out by FAA investigators, his career effectively over. Thomas Green and Bradley Wilson huddled with Davidson, already strategizing damage control. In the midst of the activity, Senator Monroe approached Elise. Took the long way around, but you finally got your wings back, Jackson. With some unexpected help, Elise acknowledged. Sometimes justice needs a little push, Vanessa replied with a wink. When you're settled, call my office. The Military Review Board is ready to reconsider your case. Full reinstatement of rank and honors is looking likely. As Elise gathered her documents, Zoe burst into the room, breathless with excitement. Elise! You're all over the news. They're calling you the hero pilot hidden in plain sight. Elise smiled, the weight of 8 years of silence and submission finally lifting from her shoulders. Not hidden anymore. Walking out of the conference room, she passed the cleaning staff who had arrived to prepare for the next meeting. They stopped, recognizing her from the news, uncertain how to interact with the janitor who was suddenly a celebrity. Elise paused, acknowledging them with respect and solidarity. Thank you for your work, she said sincerely. It matters more than people know. As she stepped into the elevator with Zoe, Elise reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the cockpit of an F-35 to pushing a mop, and now back to the sky where she belonged. The path had been longer and harder than she could have imagined, but as the elevator rose toward the executive offices, Elise Jackson was finally ascending again. 6 months later, the gleaming Horizon Airlines flagship Boeing 787 Dreamliner sat at Gate A1 at Reagan National Airport. Freshly painted with the company's new logo, redesigned as part of their corporate rebrand following the Flight 237 incident. The aircraft represented the airline's public commitment to reaching new horizons through excellence and diversity. In the cockpit, Captain Elise Jackson performed pre-flight checks with meticulous precision. Her uniform was crisp, four gold stripes gleaming on each shoulder, the wings on her chest polished to a high shine. Beside her sat First Officer Zoe Parker, formerly a flight attendant, now in the final stages of her accelerated pilot training program under Elise's mentorship. External power connected, APU start sequence initiated, Zoe reported, following the checklist with the dedication of someone who had been given an opportunity she'd once thought impossible. Confirmed, Elise replied, her calm professionalism unchanged from her military days. Continue with pre-flight checks. Through the cockpit window, the busy terminal buzzed with morning activity. In the 6 months since Flight 237, much had changed at Horizon Airlines and in Elise's life. 2 weeks after the emergency landing, a military review board had reconvened to examine Elise's case. With Senator Monroe's influence and new evidence from pilots who finally felt safe to come forward, the board had unanimously overturned her dishonorable discharge. Lieutenant Colonel Elise Jackson had been formally reinstated, her rank restored, back pay awarded, and her service record amended to reflect the truth of the training incident. General Maxwell faced criminal charges for evidence tampering and abuse of power. Nathan Stewart had been stripped of his pilot's license and faced potential prosecution for falsifying credentials. The military had issued a public apology to Elise, though as she often remarked to friends, justice delayed is still justice. At Horizon Airlines, the transformation had been equally dramatic. Richard Davidson, recognizing that his company's survival depended on embracing change rather than resisting it, had offered Elise not just a pilot position but the role of director of flight operations. In this capacity, she oversaw pilot training, safety protocols, and hiring practices. Her first initiative had been creating the Horizon Diversity in Aviation Scholarship Program, which provided flight training opportunities for women and minorities. Her second had been a complete overhaul of the airline's hiring practices, removing barriers that had previously kept qualified candidates from consideration. Bradley Wilson and Thomas Green had been demoted following the investigation, which revealed a pattern of discriminatory practices they had enabled or actively participated in. The corporate culture was changing, slowly but meaningfully. Today's flight was symbolic. The inaugural journey of Horizon's flagship aircraft under its new leadership, with an all-female, diverse flight crew. Media had gathered to document the occasion, part of the airline's very public commitment to transformation. A knock at the cockpit door interrupted Elise's thoughts. Richard Davidson entered, now noticeably more humble in his demeanor toward her. "Captain Jackson, everything ready for our special flight today?" "On schedule and all systems nominal, Mr. Davidson." "Excellent." He hesitated, then added, "The media would like a few words before departure. A statement about your journey from your previous position to commanding our flagship." Elise smiled slightly. "You mean my journey from cleaning your planes to flying them?" "I'd be happy to speak about that transformation." Davidson nodded gratefully. In the months since Flight 237, he'd learned to appreciate Elise's directness, even when it made him uncomfortable. The airline stock had risen 20% since she joined leadership, with passengers specifically requesting flights piloted by the hero of 237 or graduates of her training program. "They're waiting in the terminal if you have a moment." "I'll be there shortly. First Officer Parker and I need to complete our checks." After Davidson left, Zoe turned to Elise. "He still can't quite look you in the eye, can he?" "Guilt does that to people," Elise replied. "But he's learning. The airline is changing. That's what matters." They finished the pre-flight sequence, then Elise stepped into the terminal where journalists had gathered. Camera flashes greeted her as she approached the microphone stand. "Captain Jackson, how does it feel to be commanding Horizon's flagship 6 months after working as their janitor?" called out a reporter from CNN. Elise stood tall, her posture reflecting her military bearing. It feels like justice. Not just for me, but for everyone who has been overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside because of who they are rather than what they can do. Do you harbor resentment toward Horizon for your years as a janitor? Asked another journalist. I don't resent the work itself. There's dignity in all honest labor. What I resented was being forced into invisibility, having my skills and experience dismissed because of factors that had nothing to do with my abilities. Elise's voice was clear and confident. Today isn't about resentment. It's about transformation, of this airline, of opportunities in aviation, and of our understanding of who belongs in the cockpit. The questions continued, with Elise answering each thoughtfully. Finally, Amelia Washington from the Washington Post, whose investigative series on Elise's case had won national acclaim, asked the question many were thinking. Captain Jackson, your story has inspired thousands of people facing discrimination in their fields. What message do you have for them today? Elise paused, considering her words carefully. Remember that your value isn't determined by how others see you. I spent 8 years cleaning floors, but I never stopped being a pilot in my heart and mind. Keep your skills sharp, document everything, and be ready when opportunity comes, even if it arrives in ways you never expected. After the brief press conference, Elise returned to the cockpit to complete preparations for departure. Through the terminal windows, she could see former colleagues from the military who had come to witness this moment, including Senator Monroe. Several of her former squadron mates had traveled cross-country to support her. As boarding completed, Elise performed final checks while cabin crew prepared the passengers. Raymond Taylor, who had initially tried to prevent Elise from entering the cockpit during the emergency, was now lead flight attendant and one of her strongest supporters. Captain, Raymond called from the doorway, cabin secure and ready for departure. Thank you, Raymond. Elise adjusted her headset and prepared for pushback. Zoe looked over, her expression reflecting the significance of the moment. Ready, Captain. Elise nodded, then activated the passenger address system. Her voice, calm and authoritative, filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Elise Jackson speaking. Welcome aboard Horizon Airlines Flight 1237 to San Francisco. Today marks a special journey for this aircraft and for our airline. 6 months ago, many of us learned that appearances can be deceiving, that greatness can be found in unexpected places, and that sometimes, the person cleaning your tray table might just save your life someday. A ripple of appreciative laughter spread through the cabin. Our flight time today is 5 hours and 15 minutes. We'll be cruising at an altitude of 38,000 feet. The weather in San Francisco is clear and beautiful, much like our path forward. My first officer, Zoe Parker, and our entire crew are honored to have you with us today. She paused, then added, this is a historic flight in more ways than one. Our flight deck and cabin crew represent the diversity that makes American aviation strong. Today, we soar above the limitations others tried to place on us. We fly not despite our differences, but empowered by them. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Elise felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun with her grandfather's Tuskegee Airman wings had closed. From fighter jets to mop buckets and back to the sky. Her journey had been harder than most, but as the powerful engine spooled up and the aircraft began to move forward, Elise Jackson knew she was exactly where she belonged. The Dreamliner accelerated down the runway, lifting gracefully into the morning sky over Washington, D.C. Below, the airport where Elise had spent 8 years in forced humility grew smaller. Above, the limitless blue stretched before her, a canvas of possibility. Captain Elise Jackson had come home. If you were moved by Elise's incredible journey from being treated as invisible to commanding the skies, please hit that like button. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated based on their job or appearance? Comment below with your experiences of seeing people rise above discrimination. Subscribe to hear more extraordinary stories of resilience and triumph, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that sometimes our greatest heroes are hidden in plain sight. Thank you for joining us today, and remember, the sky isn't the limit when your spirit soars beyond the clouds. Elise Jackson's journey teaches us that true excellence cannot be permanently suppressed. Despite systemic racism that stripped her of her rightful position, her skills and character ultimately shone through when lives depended on it. Her story reminds us that discrimination doesn't just hurt individuals, it deprives society of extraordinary talent and potential contributions. For 8 years, an elite pilot cleaned floors while less qualified people flew planes, a stark example of how prejudice wastes human potential. The story also highlights the courage required to maintain dignity in the face of daily humiliation. Elise never internalized others' dismissive treatment, preserving her sense of self-worth despite external circumstances. When crisis struck, she didn't hesitate to step forward, putting others' safety above her personal comfort. Perhaps most importantly, Elise's triumph shows that justice, though delayed, remains worth fighting for. By meticulously gathering evidence and staying prepared, she was ready when opportunity, albeit through disaster, finally came. Her ultimate victory wasn't just personal vindication but systemic change that opened doors for others facing similar barriers.